Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is Jarrell Mason, and welcome to another edition of Beyond the Album Cover, where we get inside the entertainment industry with those in the know and give them their flowers while they're here to be celebrated. With me, I have no stranger to the podcast, previous guests, been with this man since our days at UNCG at the radio station WAG. Back once again, my man, Craig Veltri. Craig, thank you for coming back on, bro.
A pleasure and a privilege as always to be in your company, J Mace. Thanks for having me.
No problem, man. I guess we're doing better today than the Team US because as of the recording of this podcast, Team USA just got knocked out of the World Cup by the Netherlands 3-1 in the round of 16. So, unless the best and the brightest athletes decide to go in soccer, we'll keep having the same result every 4 years. But I know in the next World Cup, which will be in 2026, they're going to expand the qualifying pool to, I believe, 48 teams. So that means more countries will get a chance to qualify. And unless we get the corruption out of FIFA, then it's going to be a lot of palms being greased, backroom deals being made. Go check out FIFA Uncovered on Netflix if you have not done so. It's definitely worth a watch.
I will say that, you know, progress, not perfection when it comes to the United States as far as their soccer program. For many, many years, probably since the beginning of the World Cup, keep in mind the United States were basically a non factor as a team. And it really hasn't been until recently with the rise of Landon Donovan and the run that they had in Brazil several years ago, even going further back to the 2010 World Cup, they made a pretty deep run, if I remember correctly. I'm not a soccer head, so don't at me, ladies and gentlemen. But they, the fact that they're getting this far, it's showing that there is interest in this country. And anytime America, one thing that we're always good about. You can call us fair weather, but we like winners. So the fact that they're getting closer and closer to it, it's a good thing because I think more diversity of sports in the marketplace is a good thing. Am I a fan of soccer? No, but I understand that it has its popularity, it has its pull, and if we are doing well on the international stage, it's always a good thing to have your name in the hat.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I believe in 2026, it's going to be split amongst three countries: the US, Mexico, and Canada for hosting the World Cup. So that's going to be very interesting
That'll be very
given
interesting.
that. And then also, like I stated earlier, they're going to expand the qualifying pool to, I believe, 48 teams. So hopefully, Team USA can make another deep run in 4 years when they host the World Cup again. Now, I
That
want
I
to
think is a bit of a mistake. I think any time expansion happens in a playoff, I think the quality of the playoff tends to go down. Consider the World Series this year. The Philadelphia Phillies were as far as record were concerned, were the 11th best team in baseball. And yeah, they were able to clip two on the easily the best team in baseball, the Houston Astros. Say what you will about what happened a couple of years ago in the World Series, but they have built themselves into a juggernaut, and the outcome was inevitable. So I think when you add powder puff teams into anything, it's just product for the sake of the product, and it's not. I don't think that expansion to 64 teams in NCAA, that's a good number. Anything for 68 at this point, I think that's a good system that they have. But I think doing that, I don't think it. There's always the chance for the upset, and really that's only good for booking uh, agencies and bookies rather. So
Mhm.
yeah, I don't think that's going to be a good thing for it. But hey, maybe it'll give the U.S. an upper hand. We'll see.
Right. And speaking of upsets, last night Utah dashed the hopes of the USC Trojans of going to the college football playoff, beating them in
Really?
the Pac-12 championship. So somewhere Brutus the Buckeye in Ohio State is saying thank you, Utah, because that means they'll get into the fourth spot. And speaking of expansion, the college football playoff will expand to 12 teams 2 years earlier than expected in 2024. The Rose Bowl was the lone holdout, but he finally caved in and said, we're going to join the expansion. So, how this will work, it'll be where it'll be the top 12 teams in the playoff, top four seeds get buys, and then the high seed will host a playoff game, and then it will rotate amongst the New Year's Six bowls for semifinal games and then a standalone championship game a week later.
It was always a mess with college football, the way the bowl system always worked out. So the fact that they are incorporating the bowls, managing to keep these bids, and because the cities that host these bowls, your Orlando's, your even Charlotte, and other Gainesville, Florida. Actually, no, yeah, the name your Florida city and any that get those, the Citrus Bowl, the Gator Bowl, what have you. They the fact that they're going to get a nod on this and they're not breaking it down. I think it's a. I mean, it was a flawed system to begin with. They should have had a playoff from the start, but too little, too late. And advertising in this country has always had an unjust and unfair pool in this country, and that's kind of how the bowl system and the ranking system really started. But the fact with that expansion, I'll make it. I can make an exception on it, and it's as a it's as a fan of college football, and I'm not surprised that USC got upended by Utah. Utah was always low key one of the best teams in the country, and anytime you have I mean, we saw what happened with UCLA USC, and how they get offended if you get these teams. If you manage to just get at least whoever has the ball left against this team, Lincoln Riley teams especially, you will probably wind up beating that team. And correct me if I'm wrong if that's what happened. I didn't watch the game, but it I really like their quarterback. I do think he has a good bid for the Heisman, and I think that I mean, I love college football. I'm a Pitt fan for hail to Pitt till I die, and it's always fun to watch because even in college football more than any, there's always that unknown just because of the nature of the game and recruiting, and players graduate and don't have as long careers as the pros do. That for me is always that there's not much purity in anything in the world, but I think college football is probably the most uh, pure as far as anything can happen.
Right. And to quote Matt Rule, at the end of the day, now coaching at Nebraska, we wish him well at Nebraska. And I'm sure David Tepper's happy that Nebraska picked up the tab for what he owed him after giving him the
Oh
Charlotte
yeah.
Heave Ho. So enough of the sports talk. Let's jump right into music. Let's talk about the important connection between music and how down south we call it wrestling, because I don't know
Wrestling.
if you happen to catch the show Tales from the Territories on Vice, which is a very great show. Talks about the different territories of wrestling before Vince McMahon came and gobbled them up and made the WWE a national brand.
I am a huge fan of the gentlemen who produce that show. They are also responsible. I can't remember Evan Husney, and I can't remember the other dude's name, but they are Canadian producers who have gotten involved with Vice TV, and they also produce another great show in a similar vein called Dark Side of the Ring, which I am a huge fan. I've watched every episode. I've not gotten around to watching all of the territories. I've been just so busy on my side getting a music video out. My last single dropped. I've been planning a tour around the nation, so I really haven't had time to sit down and watch anything. Hence my lack of. I mean, I used to watch every college game that I could ever possibly watch. Now I'm just constantly on the run, and I don't even have time really to check my phone for that. But as far as the uh, wrestling in the territories podcast documentary series rather, yeah, that is I always have enjoyed listening to Jim Cornette, who is a wrestling manager. I would argue between him, Bobby Heenan, and Paul Heyman, the greatest wrestling managers to have ever done the gimmick. And he has his own podcast. He has two podcasts, Jim Cornette Experience and Jim Cornette's Drive Through, which I do. I used to listen to all the episodes, but now I just kind of catch the clips when I get a chance. And hearing him tell stories, a lot of the stories that are on this the territory thing, and especially about the music that got involved. Music in professional wrestling is really kind of a new thing, and it was a rarity back in the territory days. Really, the only people who had entrance themes was Gorgeous George back in the '50s. I think he used to come into I want to say it was Pomp and Circumstance. It was the same. It was the same thing that Randy Savage used to come to the ring to, and it is a great atmosphere. Anytime you can accentuate anything or make it seem bigger, wrestling thrives on it. So it so you know even if I was unironically bopping to a Bad Streak USA by the Fabulous Freebirds yesterday. The being in as an announcer and as a fan of professional wrestling, anytime I watch shows like that, it brings back. If I didn't live it brings back some perspective on what I watched, and when I watched the stuff that I did, it brings back some real fondness, real great nostalgia.
Yeah, because I can remember back in around 85, right when the first WrestleMania was getting off of the ground, Vince McMahon strategically got in bed with MTV to create the rock and wrestling connection with
Right.
Cyndi Lauper. Then you had her with Captain Lou Albano, and just really the synergy of the new medium at the time, which was music video, combined that with the tradition of wrestling and became a match made in heaven. And then we later started to see other wrestling acts come out to the popular music of the day. I remember Nasty Boys coming out to Nasty by Janet Jackson, Coco
Yeah.
Beware coming out to The Bird by Morris Day and the Time,
Rock and Roll Express coming
Rock
out
and
to
Roll
Jump by Van
Express.
Halen. Yeah.
And how the synergy between music and wrestling, it was really a match made in heaven for both, because the musicians saw sales increase because of MTV and the exposure on WWE. And then I'm sure Vince probably saw the spike in attendance because of the music being played. And once again, this was back in the days when wrestling, it was all about protecting the business and not breaking kayfabe. Kayfabe,
Mm-hmm.
it was
Yeah.
the art of keeping up with the act. You pretty much
Yeah.
ate, slept, and breathed it 24/7. If you were a good guy, a baby face, or a bad guy, a heel, you
Yeah.
wouldn't be seen together in public, which is why for me, it's still weird to see The Undertaker be normal and do interviews, because I was so used to seeing them not break character for the 30 plus years that he was working in the WWE.
It is wild to hear him do cameos to people that, and I'm quoting an actual cameo video that he did to All Elite Scooby Doo. Happy birthday! It is bizarre to see. Well, I mean, he did have the biker gimmick, which was more Mark Calloway than Taker, but it like I say, the bigger that you can do, and that's what kayfabe is all about. You can, if you can blur the line between reality, people really aren't knowing, because that's what really does get people in the door and people coming back to it. Yes, it's larger than life personalities. Yes, we do realize that this isn't a work, but more and more, there's a doubt. Maybe these two guys aren't really liking each other. That's why I think there was why there's such interest now with uh, Punk and his acrimonious exit from AEW with the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega. People, I think, want to see that return, because these guys really don't like each other. Maybe we're actually going to really see some more action, and see more of a car crash, which I think when people kind of did have kind of doubts, everybody's known that wrestling isn't real. The business has been revealed time and again since the 50s. There have been exposés about it for a while. There was an expose ahead of WrestleMania 1 by 2020 that kind of exposed everything and kind of explained what Eddie Mansfield most famously showed on Stossel how to do a body slam. So it and he still and there's still people in the business like Jim Cornette that want him not to breathe ever again because of it. But it's funny you talk about WrestleMania, and I get what you're asking about, how music and wrestling blended, especially back then. The MTV and WWE collaboration was right time, right time, right time, right place, right sensations. because this was 1985. MTV was this new hot thing, and Vince McMahon was getting ready to do his national expansion. Which, by the way, if it wasn't going to be Vince, it was going to be somebody else. The hatred against him for that, you can find a lot of different ways to be upset about Vince McMahon, but wrestling and overtaking territories, there was already overlap. People were already going over territory lines with the advent of cable television. 6:05 on Saturday night, the mothership, baby, TBS for Saturday for World Championship Wrestling with Gordon Solie, baby. And it was going to go that way. So MTV had the hot platform. It was bright. If you watched a lot of those music videos back then, it was a lot of new wave. It was a lot of big hair, heavy metal, and stuff like that. And even the R&B acts, with the Jerry curls and the glitter jackets, it was very bright. It was very colored. It was very loud, and you didn't even have to turn your speakers up to make it loud. Wrestling was very much the same way at that time, with Hulk Hogan and Macho Man and Roddy Piper running his mouth. At that time, they would say the match made in heaven when Elizabeth and Randy Savage married on a pay-per-view a couple years afterwards. They billed it the match made in heaven. They really were the match made in heaven, and it was boon. I mean, I said it in a blog once, if about WrestleMania 1. It would have been the same if Cyndi Lauper, who should be in the WWE Hall of Fame. I would imagine with her, it's a matter of I don't want to be involved in that anymore. But with her name, that would have been like if Katy Perry or even Taylor Swift somehow got involved with wrestling at the time. One of the if not the biggest female pop star at the time, and her name and her contribution to that angle, her, Wendy Richter, Moolah, them going up against Roddy Piper, it was indeed a match, not to be repetitive, a match made in heaven. And it is we still talk about it today because it was so effective. And even though MTV is not the power that it used to be, it still is an incredible part and unheard of part of wrestling history, because wrestling uses media all the time, but they never really had used this kind of media and this exclusivity before. Not a local station, not a sports related station, because ESPN did exist at the time, but no, a music channel to promote, a sports entertainment event, as it was.
Right. Let's talk about the importance of MTV, because I believe for this current generation, the 2000s babies, they can't wrap their heads around. There was a time where the only time you got to see your favorite act was even when they were perform on a music show or performing at a concert. But you mean to tell me that they could put out a video to a song and I can literally sit and watch it 24 hours a day?
Well, now I think more and more it's a matter of people have the option of what video to watch. Yes, MTV. I used to be puzzled as it was starting to happen, when we were really starting to become, teenagers, and we started to become men. MTV and VH1 too. I didn't watch much BET, but I'm assuming that was the case in CMT. All the music channels that played music or had music shows were doing less and less of them. And Daniel Tosh, the comedian, once pointed out, how is that legal to say you're MTV and you don't play your music television, you don't play music? Well, the the market changed. I was talking to a friend of mine, Sasha McVeigh. She's a country singer and she lives in Nashville. She's had songs played on CMT, and the industry has changed right before our very eyes very quickly. TikTok superstars and songs that are now written for that medium are becoming more and more prevalent on the charts, and it's an evolution, and everything is inevitable and necessary. So the fact that MTV and the way we used to watch music videos, every day after school, TRL, Carson would bring out Britney and Limp Bizkit. I think I said on your show it was probably the most eclectic cross section that anybody could have ever put on television. Maybe people who watch Top of the Pops over in England might like to disagree, and I'd be interested to hear that argument. But for me, to hear a punk band followed by a boy group, followed by a metal act, followed by a rap act, I don't, you know, I think people wonder why so many playlists have an identity crisis. If you really follow them, it's because, well, we were exposed to everything. And I wonder, and I don't want to say worry, but I wonder if that is going to, that this trend of TikTok is going to kind of really just keep people coming to the same and not exploring, but again, not a
Yeah, you don't want to sound like old man yelling at cloud. And of course, we all know when MTV was created, it pretty much was the video form of AOR, Album Oriented Rock, or Top 40 Radio.
Oh
And
yeah,
there is an interview clip of David Bowie, rest in peace,
indeed.
when he was talking with Mark Goodman and he was grilling him about the fact that MTV didn't really play a lot of black artists at that
Mm.
time. And, I had a chance to interview Nina Blackwood and I asked her about that. And she pretty much stated, MTV was created as a model of AOR or Top 40. We weren't really trying to really market towards R&B. But when Rick James made statements in Billboard and other publications stating it's pretty much like apartheid, where we're at the back of the bus again, and then Walter Yetnikoff, head of CBS, called MTV and said, "Hey, I'm going to pull all my videos from our library if you don't play Michael Jackson," which segues into the next thing I want to talk about with you. This year is the 40th anniversary of the classic album Thriller, one of the best albums ever produced, ever made. Clocks in at little over 74 minutes and it's only 9 tracks. So can we just talk about the impact of that album and how it changed the landscape of making albums, and the video itself changed how music videos were made?
I will gladly talk about Thriller in just a second because it is an incredibly great album. But hot take, not Michael Jackson's best album, in my opinion. That I believe belongs to the 1987 fall, which had 7 number 1 singles, including probably his most rockin' tune for sure, "Dirty Diana." I put that on. That's just my taste, but I love that on top of it. The ballad on Thriller was "She's Out of My." No, it wasn't "She's Out of My Life." It was the one that closed the record. I really don't like that one. I don't even remember what it was called, but I will take "I Just Can't Stop Loving You" over that one any day. And of course, "Smooth Criminal" is untouchable. Even Alien Ant Farm couldn't ruin it. And Thriller in and of itself, it was a phenomenon, and it was something that had been bubbling for about 14 years. Everybody knew who Michael Jackson was. Off the Wall was out of this world. It was a great disco record. And he had done solo records before. He had released that single for a movie about a mouse named a mouse named Rat, a
Ben.
mouse named Ben. And he, I mean, this young man was a pro already. And he and Quincy had already established a really great rapport. And when that video for Billy, not for Thriller, but for Billie Jean came out, I think there are moments in life and moments in music where you can point to and it's like, okay, the game has changed. MTV was responsible for a lot of that from about 1981 to let's say 2002. You can point to a video premiering and knowing that the world changed. I would say that happened with Nirvana "Smells Like Teen Spirit," and I definitely would say that would happen with Billie Jean because the look of it, just the way the art form had evolved in just 2 years since MTV. I mean, people have been doing promotional films for decades. Even the Beatles did a bunch of those, and every act has done some kind of lip sync film. but to have the cuts and the video edits and the the squares that were done somewhat ineffectively even up to that point, and how sharp it was, and how just the thing about Michael Jackson and all of his music, tight. Everything about it is just tight, and you can see it in the editing. Now, the ambition you wanted to talk about on the Thriller video, which is considered the greatest video time. It is a great short film. Absolutely. John Landis and his background and full length features, including probably most relevant to this feature, An American Werewolf in London. He was a master of and building that horror atmosphere. In fact, I actually knew one of the dancers in that video, a man by the name of Mark Sellers. He had gotten his start in Hollywood at the time as a dance solid gold, and he parlayed that into getting an audition and doing doing the Thriller video. And he talks very highly not only of Michael but of John Landis in that. Hopefully, I can get him on the interview someday. I met him in Nashville, and it's been many years since I've spoken to him. But that video always haunted me. I'll tell you this story about Thriller. Thriller scared the living hell out of me as a kid, and when I would go over to my grandmother's house. My grandmother had cable TV in the basement, so naturally, I'd always try to sneak away from whatever the adults were talking about. And my aunt Sue, who was always a bit of a ball buster, she said to me, she would say to me as I'm going downstairs, "Hey, Craig, don't go down there. Michael Jackson is waiting for you." And my eyes would get wide as saucers, and I'd go hiding under a kitchen table or something. Please, don't let Michael be down there. No, no, no. So yeah, Thriller. Not in my opinion, not Michael Jackson's greatest. I wouldn't point to that as his greatest record, but record sales would say otherwise. It's still the second best selling record of all time.
Yeah, and I believe there was a article done at the time. I believe they were saying 1 out of 3 homes on that album. I mean, 9 tracks, all of them were pretty much strong records, and it was pretty much take your pick for which one you want to be your lead single. And with that album, Michael was
I
completely
would not have led with
focused.
the girl is mine personally, but
Yeah, Michael was solely focused on that album of the pop market. While Off the Wall was a smash album, my personal favorite of his albums, it really was only looked at as an R&B album and really didn't get the pop accolades that Thriller ended up getting. So that was his main focus, where it was like, hey, if they think that I'm just going to be in this R&B box, just you wait till I make this album. And the secret sauce for that Thriller album that I think a lot of music heads know who he is, know the band that he came out of, but general public may not know the late great Rod Temperton, who was in the band Heatwave.
okay, yeah, I didn't know that part of it, but yeah, well, I think you look at a lot of the great artists, and you can't, especially back then, it really comes down to not just merely their vision, but finding somebody to help execute that vision. I think Janet Jackson found it, to she was on her third when she released Control 3 years later. She found that in Jam and Funk. I think Def Leppard found that when they started collaborating with Mutt Lang, and among many others, can say that from Brian Adams to ACDC to Shania Twain can say that about Mutt Lang. And with Michael Jackson, that was Quincy Jones. And Quincy Jones, who had a long and fruitful career, it is true. The movie Ray is true. He basically got to start rubbing shoulders with guys like Ray Charles, and he built his way into being a composer. He had worked with Sinatra already up to that point, and then along comes Michael, and it was not merely a revival for Quincy Jones, who had already a stellar career at that point. It was his crowning achievement, I think. And I think it, when so Michael Jackson, for as much as he changed the world with his songs and his voice and his dancing, you got, I think Thriller is a two-man credit job. You got to say Michael, of course, but Quincy Jones and that sound that he helped facilitate definitely deserves much, much, much of the credit, and he does, I believe.
Mhm. And I want to switch gears for a minute. Do you remember during this time when certain acts they would do alternative music videos where they'll have two videos for the same song, but one for, let's say, the pop market and one for the R&B market, where you only saw like a certain video on, like, let's say BET, but then when you turn to MTV, the video will be completely different for the same song.
Do you remember? Well, I can say not specifically for that era, but yeah, I've seen several artists that have done different versions of videos. I remember Weezer back in 2002 did released a version of the song "In the Sun" that was basically based on a wedding scenario concept video, and then they released another one where they were just out in a safari playing with the lion cubs, basically. So I think I don't know if it's as far as releasing like remixes and stuff like that. That's not. I don't think that's uncommon, and it's a matter of and matters of reaching markets. I was talking about this. The interview hasn't aired yet, but I was talking to an R&B artist by the name of Annie Mae, who calls herself the Neo Soul Songstress, and she and I got to talking just about how, because she's in what's called, she calls her band the Rhythm of the Night Fusion Band. And I think kind of going back to the point that we made earlier is that we are seeing more and more that our music is blended so much that genre, it doesn't really, it still exists, and it certainly is something that record companies and people who put playlists together are certainly looking for something that is easily defined. But as an artist, I kind of puzzles me why people try so hard to. I talked about Shania Twain earlier when she released the Up record in the early part of the 2000s. She released, I believe, it was a green and a red record. I can't remember which was which, but the other one was meant for country radio, the other was meant for pop radio. And even listening it back to back, I still find myself thinking, why did you have to go through all that trouble? And then I had to remind myself, oh yeah, anytime my dad, for example, anytime he hears distorted guitars, it's a complete turnoff. And I've known enough people that have heard twangy guitars, and that's a turnoff too. So I get why people strain to reach an audience, but I for me as an artist, I hope that if somebody hears me go in a completely different direction, it wouldn't be jarring or surprise or even a turnoff. But it's art and it's subjective, so I have no control over that. And I try personally just to make the best music possible. And if people want to go to that lengths to get everybody involved, I the cynical part of me wants to say all the things I could say, but at the same time, hey, hey, bring everybody to the party any way you can, pal. Good for you.
Yeah, and with country, it's not your grandparents' country anymore. It's pretty
Oh
much
no.
like you stated earlier, the blurring of lines between different genres. You have pop, R&B, rap, and how when I looked at country music growing up, I thought it was Three Chords, The Truth, Garth Brooks, Conway Twitty, Merle
Mm-hmm.
Haggard, Waylon Jennings, Willie Nelson, Dolly Parton, that traditional country. But now you wouldn't even know that a current country record sounds like a pop record. So, what is your take on country becoming more modernized and is pretty much, in my opinion, basically Southern fried pop?
That is a great label for it. I totally can see that, and I really might start describing that myself. I completely and totally agree. I think you talk about Garth Brooks, the sentiment about country music blending in, they've always were behind when it comes to that. And when they try to come back, it is often jarring. And when it's done right, it's beautifully done. Now, I am of the opinion that there are only two kinds of music, good and bad. And it's funny you mentioned Garth Brooks. He wanted to go a completely different direction out of his music, so much so that he had to change his name and put on a wig.
Chris
So
Gaines.
Chris Gaines, yeah, and that was honestly a really solid record, and I feel, I can never feel bad for a billionaire, but as an artist, I feel like it's like, did you really have to go that far? These are some good, solid songs, and maybe you didn't have, maybe you could have just, started like a side project or something. You didn't have to, make a movie and, dress like that. And, but but as far as how it's blend, guys like, Kane Brown immediately comes to mind. I do like his stuff. What if I think is a great song. And Florida Georgia Line, you can, they're the easy target because they're the big dogs. But Round Here is a fun little song that I really do enjoy. And I heard it enough from old men yelling at clouds who weren't even really that old. I'm talking guys like in their 20s saying, well, that isn't country. That isn't no, that really isn't country. And I think I've said this before on this show. Country hasn't really been country since the Carter family, since Roy Acuff, since Jimmy Rogers. So if you really want old country, well, then stay in that lane and join us when you get some perspective. Music is it's art. It's going to blend into, because artists tend to not like one thing and one thing only. Their reference is not just one thing, it is not just one place. And if it was, it hope it's still going to affect somebody else later down the road, and that's going to get blended into. So, I you're trying to stop the tide at some points. And shoot me if ever I say the phrase is my music was better as a kid, because I still think that there is a lot out there that is interesting and experimental. I saw a great band when I was in Nashville, the 1975 at the Municipal Auditorium. They put on a great show, and it is, you know, yes, a lot of their music they've been accused of kind of being stuck in the 80s as far as their synth sound, but they really take a lot of chances, and they really do a lot of stuff with atmosphere, and just a lot of really just great catchy songs. And their stage show was really impressive. If you can catch a show of them on tour, I highly recommend that you do. And you can always, if you're of a mind like me, you can always enjoy it, and you can always get something out of it. And as you can see on country radio, it you know the it was shocking when people were blending in stuff from that sounded like the Eagles in the mid 90s and the early 2000s. Well, that ain't Johnny Cash. Well, Johnny Cash started on a Memphis rock and roll label. Let's never forget that. So yeah, stop trying to push the tide. You ain't that strong.
Right. I definitely agree with that. And on the sidebar, if you have not gone to Nashville to take a tour of the Grand Ole Opry, I suggest you do so. You will not be disappointed to hear about the history, the legacy of the Opry, what it means to country music, and how, it is akin to what the Apollo Theater is for the R&B scene. The Opry is that for country. So I would definitely recommend taking a tour of the Opry and going to check out a show if you're ever in the Nashville area. And I believe also the African American
Say
Music
hi to my
Museum
friends for
is in
me.
Nashville as well. And what I want to go into now is you mentioned 80 synth sounds with the 1975. What is your take on Duran Duran finally getting in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame?
Ah, I like Duran Duran,
I do too.
and I think they are really one of the most underrated bands. I mean, I'm glad they're finally getting in there doing the Eyes of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But I think for the for the early 80s, and they were so big on fashion. I think a lot of the complaint that Eddie Trunk, at the very least, was complaining about for the elongated absence of Kiss in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame was that Kiss was pop culture. They were comic books, they were cartoons, their name was basically strapped on everything. They were the hottest band in the land, and that wasn't just a brand name as it eventually became. With Duran Duran, you can certainly make the argument that Hungry Like the Wolf was a top 10, Rio was a top 10, A View to a Kill from that was the only good thing about that Bond movie was that theme song. And he Simon Le Bon, John Taylor and the like. I mean, Taylor is is if you listen to his stuff with the Power Station, one of the best bass players of his era, of any era. I mean, he just that tone that he had. It was kind of, you know, it was kind of verby. It was kind of chorusy. It was kind of a bass guitar, kind of like what John Entwistle who was doing, but it had just a lot more. Talk about secret sauce. I say that bass was the secret sauce of that band. Otherwise, it would have been just another uh, band that I like, but I will use them as an inferior version, a flock of seagulls. So, they I think it's really great to see that finally getting its due. I mean, I think the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and just rock critics in general, they tend to deify anybody that wasn't from the zeitgeist. And I appreciate that sentiment. I think that a lot of people that have a platform, that have influence, should give credence and volume to people that aren't getting a lot of attention, and I applaud that. And if any of them are listening and like my stuff, help me. But the thing about Duran Duran, it's something that I think we've seen with Kiss, as I mentioned, with Journey. I think people kind of get sick of people that are really really popular at the time. But I think as time goes back and we look back, it's like, you know what? Yeah, they're really great, and I think that's what's at play here with Duran Duran. And bravo to Simon and the boys for sure.
Yeah, definitely glad that they finally got in, and there's plenty of other acts that's on the way to get in, and we all know that a lot of behind the scenes stuff takes place with people having votes and things of that nature. So hopefully they can be able to have some of those acts waiting at the doorstep to finally get in and get their due. You mentioned Smells Like Teen Spirit and Nirvana, and
Mhm.
how 92, I think that was one of the best years in pop, but also one of the most seminal, because before Teen Spirit, it was very pop, dance, R&B heavy. New Kids on the Block was still at the height of their career, but once Nirvana came out, that was when the pop sound shifted, and eyes were looking towards the Pacific Northwest. Pretty much all the grunge acts that were coming out of Sub Pop and all of the different labels
Yeah.
out there, certainly Geffen, A&M, MCA, insert big name record label here, were saying, we got to find the next Nirvana.
Yeah. Well, I think that Nirvana, there are very few bands that change the world really. The Beatles definitely, but the Beatles, Elvis, and Nirvana. I think you can point to them, and if you want to make arguments on who really took over the 70s, Sabbath, Zeppelin, and in the 80s maybe Van Halen, I would definitely argue Van Halen. But Nirvana, something that seismic, something that overnight, it all of a sudden it seemed like everything in January was dead by December. You talk about 91, Warrant, who I think is one of the most underrated, and another band that I think with the distance of time, you can really look back on Dirty Rotten Filthy Stinking Rich, uh, Cherry Pie, which should have been Uncle Tom's Cabin, and Dog Eat Dog. Those three records, I think you can stand them up against some of the best rock and roll of that particular era. But the world changed, and in the wake, bands like Soundgarden, Pearl Jam, Alice in Chains, they came in and they really just spoke to an angst and spoke to an anger that I think every teenage boy, every teenager really has, that I think had been touched upon. I mean, the Animals came out with "We Got to Get Out of This Place" back in the '60s, and that's probably one of the most angsty songs that I've ever heard in my life, and it was but a little bit more groovy. This was just just such anger, and I would say ironic, cynical eye rolling that only a teenager of a certain attitude can pull off, and Cobain nailed it. And I'm more of a fan of In Utero myself, and the unplugged record that they released shortly before Cobain committed suicide is one of the most haunting performances you could ever hear, especially in that context. And I can't deny enough that that band and my heart really goes out to Dave Grohl, who not only went through that but also went through losing his friend and drummer of the Foo Fighters, Taylor Hawkins, this
Rest in peace.
past year. So, he I mean that and I credit him for anytime I've seen him in interviews that he still remains just such a positive survivor in rock and roll. I don't think people say that enough about Dave Grohl. That man's a survivor, and God bless him for it.
Yeah, and how we would have known that he would go from drummer of one of the most seminal groups in music history to being the front man of another band that had a big impact in music. Because I can remember seeing the Big Me video and
Yeah.
just cracking up like crazy because they were spoofing the Mentos commercials
Yes.
at the time and how they never took themselves too seriously. Foo Fighters.
Two things about the Foo Fighters, starting with the Big Me video. When the video came out, the Foo Fighters had to stop doing that song live because people were throwing Mento at the stage. And if you've ever had a Mento is a mint. It is a candy with a hard shell. It's about the size of a quarter. So you're getting pelted by pebbles basically from very well-meaning rock and roll fans, and most rock and roll fans at a show do not mean well. And I'm serious. But the other thing, Dave Grohl, when he first put out that first Foo Fighters records, the first Foo Fighters records was actually Dave playing all the instruments on there. So it was basically just his side project, thinking that Nirvana was going to do another record and keep on going on. And he remembers in several interviews he recalls Kurt Cobain actually kissing him after hearing stuff like Big Me off of that first record. So I have fond memories. I wouldn't call myself. I appreciate the Foo Fighters. I like a lot of their songs. I'm not. It's not a go to. It's probably just because it's always on. It's always on. So why do I have to turn it on?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and do you think that it is funny now seeing how acts like the Backstreet Boys is looked at in the same vein of how we looked at New Kids on the Block back in the day because we were too young to really understand the height of New Kids. We saw it, but not like how it was during the height of Backstreet Boys and NSYNC, where we were of age and able to see the full phenomenon, full tilt. Because I mean, you now see Backstreet Boys, doing a commercial for Tide, and how I went to check out their show a couple of months ago in Albuquerque, and they still sound great. And we want to send our love and condolences out to Nick Carter, who just recently lost his
Yeah.
brother Aaron. So
I
definitely
got a few friends
condolences
who
to the
knew
Carter
Aaron,
family.
and
Yeah,
that it what a shame. What a shame.
yeah, yeah. So what's your take on that whole 90s, early 2000s teen pop phenomenon and looking at it 20 plus years later and how it's looked at with such fondness and such love and joy?
In the middle of it, it always felt like we were pitted against each other. You either had to be a fan of this band, you had to be a fan of this one, and even if you're sitting next to me, a fan of Blink 182 and Limp Bizkit, I don't say that with much shame because there was only one thing wrong with Limp Bizkit. And sitting next to my sister who had posters of Lance Bass on her ceiling, watching the same show, and you know, and secretly loving that group for sure. As I've gotten older, I think I want to say it was a Cracked sketch or some comedian. I can't quote who it was, but when you get to a certain age and you're having strong opinions about boy groups, maybe they're not your. Maybe the problem is you, because that's what they are. They are maybe not in the case of NSYNC, they weren't record industry or agent creations. They were actually a group that found each other. They are guys who are going to sing songs that record companies want to sell songs with, pop songs. Sugar, nothing wrong with a little sugar. Basing your diet around it might cause you problems, but nothing wrong with a little bit of sugar. And the thing about those groups and the distance of time looking back, maybe not that way. Show Me the Meaning of Being Lonely, show Shape of My Heart. Most of Black and Blue, their third record, I think they really started to go deeper than just the formula to the Backstreet Boys, and they really started to get into some more risque stuff. I mean, the frickin' call. Something a little bit more risque, and because let's be honest, the first two records, the self-titled and the Millennium, that was a lot of ooh baby, ooh girl, ooh girl. And As Long as You Love Me, and the stuff that basically helped solidify Max Martin's takeover of the music industry for about the preceding 20 years. And I would say music's better I mean, if he walked into my house right now, I wouldn't know who he was, but I do. His sound and his composition, his production style is unmistakable and overarching. So like when you hear he's written, random songs like We Are Never Getting Back Together with Taylor Swift, it's like, oh yeah, that is him, isn't it? So and his touch is as broad as it is wonderful. And yeah, I think the hatred, I think, was overblown. And I think, I tend to roll my eyes whenever anybody says that the media stirs shit, pardon me, stir stuff up on a bunch of stuff. On this one, yeah, I think that a lot of the hatred between scenes, if you will, that was manufactured just so people would put eyeballs on thing and have something to fill up time in between deodorant commercials. So yeah, but yeah, I think anybody who still harbors a hatred for that kind of music, just have a cup of coffee and a smoke and shut up. So
Or better yet, have a Coke and a smile.
have a Coke and a smile, exactly. But
But
Bill have Coke and a smile, shut the hell
yeah.
up.
And the funny thing about, that genre, while it's specifically targeted towards, the teen girl market, you,
Exactly.
you know, guys hated them because you secretly probably wanted to be them because it was easy access. Because I mean, if you look at now, whenever New
I
Kids
knew
on
the
the
Bye
Block
Bye
have a
Bye dance for that
concert,
reason alone.
yeah. So whenever New Kids do a concert or they have their cruise ship, you still have moms, daughters, probably granddaughters all on the ship and just loving every last minute of it. I had a chance to see them live in Las Vegas a couple years ago on their mixtape tour. They still are selling out, and moms are reliving the glory days of, the height of their phenomenon. Because if you look at, New Kids on the Block, obviously, coming from the same tree of New Edition put together by Maurice Starr, who said, I want to create a pop counterpart act to New Edition. How initially New Kids were marketed as an R&B act. They did an alternate video of Please Don't Go Girl that you only saw on BET or
Oh
on other
wow.
stations that played only R&B. This was before pop got wind of them. And then, as we all know, that was when everything changed for them and they became huge phenomenon. Then ended up splitting in 94, coming back together in 08, and they've been rocking and rolling ever since.
Yeah, I mean, and just back to the overall point, I think a lot of us guys didn't really like it because exactly the music wasn't made for us, and it really is. I mean, if anybody who has hatred for BSK or anybody that's any of the K-pop acts, that stuff is made for teenagers. That stuff isn't made for guys like me and guys like you. But as a musician and you as a fan of music, it you can still get something out of it if you really close your eyes and just relax a little bit. And if you say it's not for you, it's not for you. It doesn't mean you need to say. I mean, there are forms of music out there that can be harmful. There are some lyrical content that can be a message that disturbed people shouldn't hear. But little pop songs about young love, that's not that there are more harmful messages out there than that. Give me a break.
Yeah, there's room for that. And I want you to talk about the impact of Pet Sounds by the Beach Boys and how it's revered as one of the best albums ever made. Like we were talking about Thriller earlier, it's up there with Thriller and also Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Heart Club Band by the Beatles, which I believe Brian Wilson stated, hey, I want to create our own version of Sgt. Pepper's.
Actually, it was other way around.
Ah,
Paul McCartney said that they heard Pet Sounds, and that really opened them up to do Rubber Soul, which begat Revolver, which begat Sergeant Pepper, which everything in the latter half of their career, which is their most revered stuff, is inspired by Pet Sounds. Now, I said Thriller, the hype is a little bit overblown with that record. No, Pet Sound deserves all of the hype that you can possibly muster. And I mean, this is a group that made its that really built towards something. I always say that my favorite records are the records that are the ones before the big artistic explosion, because you can actually see they're about to jump off and do something really really interesting. And it's amazing how the you can see the transition. Rubber Soul from the Beatles immediately comes to mind. Turnstiles by Billy Joel comes to mind immediately. Even Van Halen's 1984. They were transitioning out of a singer, and they had a whole new transition. That I mean, not my favorite Van Halen album, but I use as an example. So with Pet Sounds, it was it they what it transitioned to. My point being was the most amazing thing when you think these guys were just doing really singles. And yeah, they were going deep and introspective on a lot of songs like In My Room, Wendy, even Surfer Girl, which was a pop ballad but had these really just beautiful transitions into sevenths and minor chords. It's basically an old pop standard that maybe Sinatra or Perry Como or Rosemary Clooney, who uh, Brian Wilson has listed as an influence. So it is every great studio trick. Any producer that I brought this album up to, any producer that I met in Nashville or anywhere really, say that they use little tricks that Brian Wilson kind of perfected on that record. And the backing band that he wound up using, just like this murderer's row of session musicians out in Los Angeles, and still using the boys on harmonies and stuff like that. Songs like "Wouldn't It Be Nice," "Sloop John B," and a song that is still my mother's favorite, and I often think about it and think how true it is. "God Only Knows What I'd Be Without You." So great,
yeah,
great record, great record. I
yeah.
I need to get it on vinyl. So.
Yeah, definitely a great album. And another musician that's known for work ethic and just putting out qualities of albums. And then he had enough in the chamber to where I'm gonna put theater acts in place to do the records that I wanted to do, but I don't have enough time to do it. So here, you guys do it. I mean, Prince was a
Mm.
bad boy. I mean, to do your own stuff and to create stuff for the time, Morris Day and the Time,
Yeah.
Wendy Six, later became Apollonia Six,
Mm-hmm.
The Family, Maserati, We could go on and on all the
Just
affiliated
the stuff he
acts.
wrote under the name Christopher Goodnight, for crying out loud.
I think he used Jamie Starr, Alexander Nevermind. He had a bunch of different aliases, but let's just talk about the genius that was
Yeah.
Prince.
Prince to me was that's another one that I really didn't know what I had until it was gone. I knew about all the stuff that he had written for other artists. Nothing Compares to You, which was a number one for Sinead O'Connor. Um, I remember hearing Alicia Keys songs in A minor. Alicia Keys' debut record is always going to hold a special place in my heart because that not that record is just that slow dance at middle school, and just you know red wine and candles for the first time. And How Come You Don't Call Me Anymore, she did a version of that on that record. I think that was track 3 or 4, and she, Alicia's phenomenal. But for Prince, he was, you talk about the amalgamation that, me as an artist, I would love to do, and Prince did it. He was R&B, he could do blues, he could rock, he could be funky, he could dance, he could do that. He was a rather bite-sized but total package. He was incredible. And you go back and you watch. I go back and watch Under the Cherry Moon, and I go back and watch a lot of his music videos, and even catching some of his later stuff. He is just I he wouldn't be he probably scrape my top 20 nowadays that I listen to him. But I do have to admit, as far, if you want the perfect musician and the perfect performer and perfect producer and songwriter, I don't think you're going to get much better or closer than Prince.
Yeah, because definitely Prince took the lessons of those that came before him, like the Little Richards, the James Browns,
Yeah. Jimi
Sly,
Hendrix.
Sly and the Family Stone, and just was a meshing of all of that and just updated it. And he was just a dynamo. You knew you were going to get your money's
Mm-hmm.
worth when you saw him perform live. And then, like I said earlier, just think about all of the acts that came from the Prince tree, and how if it wasn't for Prince, no Morris Day, no Jimmy Jam, Terry Lewis,
Mm-mm. No Morris Day.
No Alexander O'Neal. The list goes on and on. And on a sidebar, real quick, check out the Showtime documentary "Nothing Compares" about Sinead O'Connor.
Mm.
Definitely very great documentary. I had a chance to see that when it was premiered at the
I really liked
Tribeca
her
Film
first record.
Festival.
The Emperor's New Clothes is basically just 2 chords, but wow, what thing she did with melody, and just a really catchy little tune from her, for sure.
Yeah, I just have a stronger appreciation for her now after seeing that documentary and how she stood on her morals and wasn't going to play the pop game once Nothing Compares to You became an international smash. And
Mm-hmm.
she was like, no, I'm going to speak out on these injustices, whether you like it or not. And pop success, I could care less of.
She said in her behind the music video, "I never wanted to be a pop singer. Thank you very much. I wanted to be a protest singer," and she did it. She's done it very well, I would say.
Right, I definitely agree with that. And one last thing I want to talk about with you before we get on out of here is how I believe next year rap is going to turn 50 years old,
Hmm.
and how it started out as a way for young black and brown kids in the inner cities, primarily of New York, to make something out of nothing. You had Rapper's Delight, which was put out on Sugar Hill Records, which was
Mm-hmm.
headed by Sylvia Robinson, who just got inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and how big it was for a black woman at that time to head a label, to put out a genre of music commercially to change the world. So, what is your take on rap turning 50 and how it is now the most beloved, dominant music genre in history? And to think it all started out in the streets and people thought it was going to go the way of disco.
Well, as a honky from the suburbs, I will say that it is amazing how this subculture that it was when I really started paying attention, when I first heard of MC Hammer, when I first heard of Dr. Dre, when I first heard of, even up to that point, hearing Eminem when I was 13 and heard My Name Is, that it was still a dangerous subculture. Not saying that because it's a predominantly black culture, but the subject matter, gang violence and drug use and uh, promiscuity on the ends of it, which permutates all music really when you think about it. Anytime you hear about gunslingers in the old west and country songs, well, what were they in? They were in gangs mostly, and they were shooting people, and there's still glorification there. So yeah, away with me on shocking subjects and stuff like that. It's amazing. Time marches on, and as it hits 50, it is still the music of youth, and it is still the music of bravado, and it still carries that um edginess that is so prevalent because we were teenagers, we're always on edge. Of course it's going to carry some edge, and it's real fast. I like a lot of artists that come out. I mean, say what you will about Takashi, he did put out a good song or two. I think you can really, as we've gone through the decades and seeing that Nicki Minaj still is in the mix on things. You can really say I think there was a great YouTube channel that I like to watch, FD Signifier, who has said that we need to make a really great argument that Nicki Minaj is the greatest of all time. She is, in fact, the GOAT. And I am very inclined to agree with that man on that subject. Because if you see the rise of Doja Cat and Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion, whom I adore, we had, seeing that sea change for women more than ever in hip hop. Yeah, you had Queen Latifah. Yeah, you had Nene Cherry back in the day, but nothing like this. And it is such a wonderful, there are faulty mutations in everything, but I think the one thing that hip hop has gotten right a lot, finally some female representation on the side, especially with the women that I mentioned for sure. And I think so what a way it has come, not just in the players in the hip hop game, but just how the sounds have changed, how many different things kind of get blended in, and how it has affected everything else around it too. I mentioned Limp Bizkit earlier on, in bands in its periphery, your Linkin Parks, PODs, and there's Rage Against the Machine, bands that are, and we're feeling that influence on top of that. I don't believe that everything happens for a reason, Jay Mace. I believe that there's a reason that everything happens, and we as a individual and as society is the sum total of those decisions. And whether it is for better or for worse is up to you tomorrow. So,
Mm-hmm.
and
Well,
and that and it's wonderful to see that rap has stuck around and has continued to have its influence for sure.
yeah, well said. Hip hop can't stop, won't stop. To the bang bang boogie, up jumps the boogie to the rhythm of the boogie
Wave your
beat.
hands in the air like you just don't care.
Yep, true that. And big ups to Eminem for getting that into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as
Absolutely.
well. Definitely happy about that. And the thing, when hip hop started, you got, believe, two billionaires in hip hop, and Jay-Z and Dr. Dre.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just crazy how Biggie said it best. Remember rapping Duke, daha, you never thought that hip hop would take it this far. So who would have
Mm-hmm.
thought? Who would have thought? So let's talk
Super
about
Nintendo, Sega Genesis.
when I was dead broke, man. I couldn't picture this. Great record. Rest in peace, Biggie. So
Indeed.
let's talk about current projects that you have. Any shout outs you want to give before we wrap, and also plug your socials.
All right. Well, my new music video for Making Noise on Music Row is now available on my new YouTube channel at Craig Veltri Music. J Mace, I do believe you'll be kind enough to put a link for that music video later on in the post edit in the description down below. Please blow it up and make me a little noise for Making Noise on Music Row. My new single is Wander and I. That is available on Spotify, YouTube Music, Apple Music, Amazon Music. I heard Napster is still a thing, and it actually gives out the most royalties per stream. It's kind of finding out like not only did Tony Montana survive, he opened a pharmacy. It's really weird. And so check me out on all of those social media. CraigVeltri.com is where you can find all of my performance dates. You can find me at on my podcast. You can follow that through the Craig Veltri interview on Facebook. You can follow the Veltri interview on Twitter. For all things Craig Veltri, you can find me at Craig Veltri Official on Facebook, and you can find me on my Instagram, or as my old roommate, the Tommy Thomas, used to call it, Instagirl, at Craig.Veltri.
All right.
And the Craig Veltri interview airs every Thursday night, 6 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Central on Scarfire Radio. That's at scarfireradio.net.
All right. You can catch this interview wherever you stream podcasts on the YouTube channel, youtube.com/beyond the album cover, and stay updated with all things related to the podcast at facebook.com/beyond the album cover. Ladies and gentlemen, give a big round of applause and thank you to my brother from another mother, Craig Veltri, for coming on. Craig, thank you once again, my brother.
An absolute pleasure, J Mace. Be well, my friend.
Yes, sir.